Hey everyone, it is May 29, 2013. I'm Rene Ritchie, and today we are going to be talking about Tim Cook's appearance at All Things D. We're going to be talking about the black and white, or silver and charcoal, or whatever, flatter but not flat iOS 7. We're going to be talking about what could happen with the next generation Mac Pro, and we're going to be talking about the future of apps. This is the all-new iMore Show. If you are just joining us, we have switched formats. We are now a much more traditional Mobile Nations show with a panel of people, a ginormous chat room. We're going to be interacting with you, taking your questions. We have over 200 people in the chat right now. They're all looking incredibly well-groomed and handsome. Chat room, say hello. Tell me how you're doing. I'm going to introduce our illustrious panel in the meantime. Joining us, as always from now on, our managing editor, Peter Cohen. How are you, Peter?
Great, thank you.
Are you on the Cape today?
I am indeed. I'm not wearing a cape, but I'm on the Cape.
Do you have to wear a cape if you're on the Cape? Because I hear from Seinfeld that they're back in style.
It's true.
Also joining us, the brand new managing editor of Mobile Nations, Derek Kessler. How are you, Derek?
I'm doing fantastic. A little tired after today's launch, but I'll survive.
We'll talk about that in a second, but your new job title might be a lot more exhausting than your old job title.
Considering my old job title had become nothing, yeah.
And one of my absolute favorite developers, David Barnard from App Cubby. How's it going, David?
Good. Thank you.
And I owe you a huge thanks because you spent literally hours with me over Skype, over the phone, helping us fix the audio, the lip syncing, the levels, all the audio things.
Yeah, well, I as we talked about before the show, I did actually get a degree in that stuff. So it's nice to be able to apply it and do favors for people who need that, since I don't really use it day in, day out.
Well, I mean, considering how well you make apps, it's amazing that your background is not just in app making.
Well, that's the funny thing, though. The program I went to was actually at a university, and it was so interdisciplinary that I actually took a UI design class in college. But I took one. We did Flash UI design stuff, so spent a lot of time on computers and stuff. It's not too far out of the ballpark of what I actually studied. We even did like video production and stuff. So it's pretty multidisciplinary.
Well, we absolutely appreciate your help. Thank you very much for that.
No problem.
So getting us started, I think the first thing, and Derek and I will just touch on it briefly, although Peter is involved, as you will see in the near future. We launched Talk Mobile 2013. You can go to talkmobile2013.com. We got it done barely in time. We got the new mobilenations.com launch barely in time. Derek, I'm amazed that you're still standing, mostly upright.
I'm sitting.
Oh,
Yeah.
now I'm less impressed.
You can't actually see it in the video here, but there are lines run to the ceiling to actually keep me upright. Otherwise, I'd just be sort of slumped over, breathing into the microphone.
I was freebasing Tonks Coffee personally.
That's impressive.
I started the central line, but I didn't have time to complete it. But if
Gotta be careful with that
if you're
stuff.
interested, it is a massive online event. It's going to be most of our content for most of the weeks going forward. Just hit up Talk Mobile 2013. And if you go quickly, you might still be able to get a party ticket. We sold out today, but they're going to try and get even more. I think there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of people at the launch party. So if you're in New York City, make sure you check that out. Did I forget anything?
Yeah, everything kicks off next week, June 3rd. Launch parties in New York on the 6th. I'm excited.
And David, I'll be bothering you to help with that when I see you at WWDC.
Oh, nice. Certainly. I was thinking about flying out to New York, but
If you can.
a little expensive this late in the game.
That's
but
true.
It was fun to price tickets anyways.
So the news this week, and Peter, maybe I'll get you to weigh in first because you've been covering this for so long. Tim Cook took the stage at D11. I think it's his second All Things D show, and he managed to speak for an hour saying not much that's new, but maybe his tone or his inflection on sometimes when he pronounced the words was different.
Yeah, pretty much. It was amazing how much scrutiny was played last night. And I mean, we did this at iMore too. You and Richard did a fine job of covering this last night about Tim's appearance at D11 last night, but there really wasn't any actual news that came from it. Not that we would expect it with WWDC right around the corner. The D conferences are not typically where Apple CEOs, past or present, have offered to introduce new products or services.
So why do people expect that? Why was the Wall Street Journal so appalled that he didn't go out there and introduce 5 new iPhones, a new iPad, and a hover car?
Because
the short
Apple
answer
is
is because
doomed.
the Wall Street Journal is staffed by idiots.
They didn't used to be. I don't want to get all newsroom on you, but they used to be staffed by newsmen who took, they took honor and pride in providing real information to people to help us live better lives.
That's absolutely right. But these days, if you want to find absolutely the worst, stupidest, most pig-ignorant news and analysis about Apple, you don't have to leave New York City. You can either go to the Times or the Journal and typically find it there.
Derek, did you watch any of it?
I watched it in afterwards, and as I didn't expect Cook to go out there and say anything. I wouldn't have been surprised if they actually just sat there and stared stone-faced at him and didn't say a word for an hour. But it's one of those things they have to answer these, or they have to ask these questions. If they didn't, they'd be lambasted. If they didn't, and so they ask the questions knowing that Tim Cook's going to say nothing at all
Diddly
about
squat.
it. Yeah, he's not going to say anything. He's going to say, he might, leak little thing out like, say, Johnny Ive is taking the lead on iOS 7 design, but he's not going to say anything about what he's doing with that.
Did you like the
Everybody
API?
knew that anyway.
So did you like the API news, David? I mean, it wasn't really news because every version of iOS gets more APIs, but it was kind of spun as though it'd be an opener.
It seemed to me the way he spoke about that they have something special planned. That he would say anything regarding APIs makes me think that something was run up the flagpole. So it happens every time, but I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I'd like to think that there's going to be something special. And I think ultimately, we've been whining about this for years. Power users don't have enough control and developers are too limited and all this kind of stuff. So I don't know. It kind of gave me a little hope that, they've been listening and, there's going to be a few pretty cool new things that we developers going to be able to do that we weren't able to do in iOS 6. So I trying to keep my hopes down as always, because WWDC, it's easy to wish for all the unicorns and rainbows and that's not how Apple works. But
I mean, Swisher was asking for replaceable keyboards and for all sorts of very Android-like things when she prefaced that question.
Yeah, and something like a replaceable keyboard is the kind of thing that might actually be possible. I mean, Apple does try, as Tim said, Apple tries to make as many choices for the user as is necessary to provide a good user experience. But at the end of the day, I mean, there are some things where developers can do some really cool thing if given the opportunity. And so on Android, there's some really awesome keyboards. And so, if Apple lets developers do keyboards but has, very specific rules, that could be a boon for the accessibility, people doing things for accessibility and things like that. So I think that there could be some really cool stuff. We'll see.
I don't know if we'll get swiped though, Peter. Do you think we'll get swiped? I mean, he said no to chat heads. I don't know how open he is to swipe.
I know. I don't think it'll happen. To me, the highlight of the entire thing was when Tim Cook made sort of an off-the-cuff comment about remembering what it was like to open presents on Christmas morning. And Kara Swisher said, well, we did it on Christmas Eve. And Walt Mossberg says, well, I'm Jewish. That was pretty much Tim Cook's entire performance for me in a nutshell.
He was well prepared. Like, obviously, he's incredibly media trained. He's not going to say anything off script. He wasn't prepared for the multi-religious disciplinary equation. But he did say, and if we break it down quickly, 13 million Apple TVs sold to date. Half of those were sold in the last year, but it remains a hobby. And echoing what Steve Jobs said, I think at D7 or D8, there's still no clear go-to-market. I mean, like Cook said, all current solutions suck, but he didn't say we have a better solution and we're going to announce it in 2 weeks.
Yeah, actually, that bit about the Apple TV did kind of pique my curiosity a bit. As some of our readers and listeners and what have you know, I moonlight on the weekends at an Apple retailer, and I think it's interesting actually that a lot of people come in to buy the Apple TV who don't have a Macintosh, who are simply iOS users, iPhone users, or iPad users, and they're looking for a cool way to share the content on their devices, on their TVs. So this is another iOS Halo product, I guess, for lack of a better term, that I think Apple is very smart in offering the way that it is, but it really kind of sells itself. It's not something that I've found as a salesperson is particularly easy to get somebody who isn't motivated to buy it. The people who we sell to the most are the people who walk in the door specifically because I want an Apple TV, because I know what it can do, and this is what makes sense to me. So, the numbers though are staggering. For Apple to increase its sales of the device so much in just a single year tells me that some threshold has been hit anyway, because it's not like they're marketing the thing.
But they're still pulling threads and exploring areas of interest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing though that the Apple TV, and as they said, with no marketing, is a hugely well, not necessarily profitable, but makes more revenue than a lot of other players make on hardware. I mean, 6 million units at $100 a piece. That's probably more gross revenue than a lot of like Windows 7 devices, maybe even some of the Android devices, making a life cycle. So it's a pretty big hobby these days.
The other thing, and Derek, you'll forgive me if I'm not up on all the U.S. political figures, but they hired the former EPA administrator Lisa Jackson for a role whose title Tim Cook could not remember, but he did know that she's reporting directly to him.
It's okay. I don't know who she is either.
I mean, is this good that we're getting more environmental people in Apple's leadership, more women in Apple's leadership? Yes.
Greenpeace said that they liked her, so I guess that's okay if you approve of Greenpeace or whatever.
Filthy hippies.
Yeah. Apple's been run by hippies. Yeah, I'd say, bringing on any new, fresh talent, as long as they work with the company and they aren't going to be, another, what's his face? The guy who was forced out after a year in retail.
Browett.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as they're not another Browett, they should be fine. They learned their lesson there.
How do you get forced out of a year in environmental? Do you just pollute something?
Probably, I would say, compromising the quality of the product over environmental concerns.
We're going to make MacBook Pros out of composted paper.
Exactly. And then they'll be composted paper, and then they're going to combust, which would be not good. I could see, this is a role that she'll be able to, if she knows what she's doing, which I assume as a former EPA official, she knows what she's doing. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, Lisa Jackson, just for some background on her, since you asked, Rene, she's a pretty sharp cookie. She's actually a chemical engineer by training. She's a woman, obviously. She's African-American. So this definitely adds some diversity to Apple senior management in a way that we haven't seen. And Apple has been criticized by some folks for not having enough minority or female representation in their senior management ranks. So it's a good win for Apple from that perspective. But basically she ran the EPA from 2009 to 2013. She was an Obama appointee, and she has a long history in environmental protection on the state level before that. So I think that she definitely brings some credibility to the table when it comes to Apple's environmental efforts. And, Apple is a lot more forward-thinking and a lot more plain-spoken about its environmental efforts, not just for itself but for its suppliers, than a lot of other tech companies. So while they're frequently the target of criticism from environmental organizations like Greenpeace, it's simply because they're such a prominent company.
They're how you get headlines, right?
Right, exactly. They're how you get headlines. So I think it's a big win all the way around, and I really hope that they make good use of her.
One of the things that I thought was kind of counterpointed that, and I don't know if it was silly or funny, but they asked him about getting Apple apps onto Android and maybe iCloud onto Android. And David, I don't know if you saw that part, but Tim Cook's response was basically, well, I'm not religiously opposed to putting Apple apps on Android, but I don't have any plans to do it, and iTunes in particular might not be a good fit, which sounded almost like no iTunes Match, no iTunes in the cloud for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not religiously opposed to building an Android app, but I have no plans to. I mean,
We could, but no.
There are some people on Twitter, commenting last night and today, and there's probably a few good posts out there about it. But, it is a little myopic to think that services like iMessage can serve iOS users as well as they should be served, being an island into itself.
It's the last island, right? Because even BBM is going cross-platform now, so iMessage will be the only single platform messaging solution.
Yeah, exactly. And so is that a great user experience? And at the end of the day, something like iMessage will always fall back to SMS. And so, you can make arguments that it's okay, but, there are some very strong and interesting cases for, Apple getting out of its comfort zone in the long run for the benefit of users. And, Tim Cook went on and on and on about product. We want to make the best products possible. And so, if you follow that line of thought to its logical conclusion, I mean, there are some areas where Apple doesn't provide a great user experience because of, their secrecy, and other things like that, and not, wanting to do cross-platform things and things like that. So, we'll see. I doubt it's going to happen, but I do think there are some strong cases for certain things. And, there's been some great writing on iCloud too, that, if Apple opened that up to where developers could actually build web services off of it, that would make it more interesting. I mean, right now, iCloud,
there's no smarts in the cloud.
No, I wish iCloud were better, and it could do a good job at just automatically backing stuff up and automatically syncing certain things. But, if you want to build an app that does more than just, exists in iOS, then you really just have to look at other solutions. So,
yeah.
iCloud is probably not Apple's strategy to build a platform, so they're probably not going to do that. But it makes it a much less interesting technology for us to use as developers. So
our chat room's agreeing with you. iFuel is saying they want iMessage, FaceTime. Ben Rothing is saying it's an island and it hurts and it makes people go and explore other options. I would tend to agree with that, and I think especially, and Peter, there was that old joke Steve Jobs said they made iTunes so that they could have a glass of water in Windows hell. And it seems like Apple's just not interested in extending the same glass of water to Android hell. I mean, regardless of your opinion of Android, if Apple believes they have a superior product, a lot of companies use services on other platforms to kind of entice you to come back to their own.
Yeah, and the whole thing about Game Center sort of being limited to iOS and OS X only really kind of rankles me, because I think that it as the resident game guy for iMore, I find it incredibly frustrating that when you download a game from the Mac App Store, for example, you are limiting yourself to playing only against other Mac players, even if the same game, the same binary, sold via a different service like Steam, has Mac to PC multiplayer. That really, really frustrates me. And I think that it's something that Apple should really fix. You can make the case that FaceTime should have been, or we were told at one point that Apple was going to open up the API for FaceTime.
Yeah, they got
right?
sued by a patent troll, and I think everything's been deferred pending that legal stuff.
Well, they said they were going to
Curse
open
you,
up the spec,
trolls.
not necessarily the FaceTime API.
Well,
They were
the
gonna
thing,
open it-
the spec, it's based on a bunch of open source, and they were going to open source their combination of those things, and then they got patent trolled, and I believe a month ago they lost the appeal on that, so we'll see what happens.
Wow.
Hey, speaking
So-
of patent trolls, did anybody else read Michael Wolff's piece in USA Today this week about how Apple's turned into a patent troll?
I have not.
No.
Oh boy, it was a lot of fun. I saw it yesterday, and well, I won't drag you guys too far down the rabbit hole with it, but suffice to say that Michael Wolff is up to his usual trolling hijinks, basically saying that the only reason that Apple has succeeded in the world is because it's hired the most vile, crafty lawyers imaginable. That's right.
Nice.
That's right, Michael. Building decent products that people want to buy has absolutely nothing to do with Apple's success.
Well, Tim Cook-
it's only because
The
of
lawyers
vile-
built the product.
Tim Cook said that though, like, so they asked him, they asked him the Android question. Android currently has, depending on how you measure it, especially outside the US, much larger market share than Apple. Apple enjoys profit share, which is the most important thing to Apple, and they enjoy user satisfaction, which is the most important thing to us as consumers. But to a lot of analysts, pundit type website title headline writers, market share is a good way to bash Apple. And Tim Cook interestingly said, with the Mac, we never had the most market share, always made a lot of money. It was a great business for us. For the iPad and iPod, we made the best product we could, and we did get majority market share. For the iPhone, we didn't. And he used that to once again reiterate that for Apple, the best product matters, not the most product. Do you buy that, Derek? Is that just a line, or is that really corporate governance at AAPL?
It's a combination of both. The thing that it comes down to is the only people that care about market share are, the companies that are selling the product and making the money, and people like us. The other 35 million people who bought an iPhone in the last quarter, they could care less about whether Apple sold more iPhones than Samsung sold Galaxy phones. It doesn't matter. They just wanted an iPhone. So
Except that back to the two previous points that we just made, it does matter, because when Game Center is an island, it matters, market share, and when iMessage is an island, market share matters. So there are places where market share matters, and and back to the Game Center thing, Google actually is opening up their Game Center competitor.
Their Google Play API is looking really nice.
That I think they actually even called Game Center on stage if I was listening closely, maybe tongue in cheek. Anyways, but that's going to be available to all developers on any platform, and so that's going to become a really compelling alternative. I mean, Rovio had to write their own, but now that's their own island, and over the next 2 to 3 years, I think it's going to be pretty compelling for game developers to jump onto the Google Play, because then you have the market share of Android for your free game, that they do have tons of users, and then you can tie it into your iOS game and tie it into your Mac game and tie it into your PC game and have everyone working together. And Google does build great services, so I think it's going to be a really compelling option. And so that's a way in which I do think market share matters, is that when, I have an iPhone and my friend gets an Android and I can't iMessage him, that's a bad user experience. And it's a problem.
Yeah. And I think that this isn't the first time that this has been tried, right? Aurora Faint came up with Open Faint, which was their API for game sharing, ladders, and so on. I don't think it had like a real multiplayer component, but it was a social gaming engine, and it was multi-platform, and it worked on Android and on iOS, and it ended up basically OpenFaint ended up getting acquired by a Japanese company that ended up shutting it down. Obviously, the same is not going to happen with the Google Play API, although we always run the risk of Google shooting it in the head, as Google is wont to do with things that don't turn out the way that they expect it to. But this is another attempt to see that. So it'll be really interesting to see, first of all, how many iOS developers who maybe also have their toes dipped in the Android world use the API, and secondly, how well it coexists with things like Game Center.
I mean, it's going to be really interesting because we're seeing everyone but Apple basically move in that direction now. Xbox Live has made an appearance. I think it was Wordament was the game on iOS. The aforementioned Google Play. Facebook is being used as a de facto cross-platform gaming center. And it's just this interoperability. And personally, I love a lot of things about Apple. I love my devices to be closed. I love my interfaces to be closed. I think those environments really foster the great user experience. But I want all my conduits and all my plumbing and all my architecture to be open so that I can switch between them without having to really worry about it. And I hope one of the things that Apple does work on is getting that kind of support out, because it only betters their platform at the end of the day. It forces people to choose you because you're the best, not because you're their only option.
Well, and it doesn't, and this gets back to the market share question and so many other things. I mean, Apple is a small company relative to let me put it differently. Their development teams and the number of developers inside Apple is small compared to Microsoft, compared to Google, and they're tackling some really huge things. And I think part of the reason iCloud has not moved forward faster is it just ends up being a resource problem. And so Apple does have to be very careful. We perceive it as them making, big, bold, strategic decisions, but sometimes it probably boils down to just an HR decision. Like, we don't have enough people to do this really cool thing that we would like to do. And it's I think Apple's going to struggle with that more and more because their culture is that, very small teams and
especially for things like the web, which is not their traditional strength, it might encumber them more.
Exactly. I've talked to several different people recently about, iTunes Connect and the App Store backend. And, at some point they're probably going to need to completely overhaul that whole system. I mean,
Google just did.
Yeah. Well, I don't know did Google really, go to the metal and revamp it, or just kind of start adding some features? Because, from what I understand, the App Store runs on all the same back-end plumbing that the iTunes Store
web objects
that was built for the iTunes Store in 2002.
Back from the days of Next.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're running the biggest, most successful software distribution store ever conceived, and it's running on giant Oracle servers with a lot of code written in 2002, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but
it's not necessarily a good thing.
It's not necessarily a good thing. And some of the weird outages and strange bugs, and some of the things that I want Apple to do that Apple doesn't do with the App Store, I honestly think has to do with those two things. That the HR, they just don't have enough people to do it. And the legacy stuff is built on a system that's really hard to fix and manipulate. So, they have some very big challenges, current and ahead.
Is there a tension, Derek, in the future there? Because Tim Cook also spoke about, one of our favorite topics, which is wearable computing. And they asked him about Google Glass, and he wasn't sure about Google Glass because, not people wear glasses because they have to, not because they want to. And they asked him about watches, and he said he didn't think a lot of 20-year-olds, aside from Derek Kessler, actually wear watches, but he was supremely interested in wearables. He spent a bit of time talking about it, and we've heard a lot about Apple's, rumored plans for that. So how do you reconcile those statements?
Oh,
easy question.
I'm not sure there's anything to actually reconcile. I mean, Apple's never working on something until they actually release it. And then they were working on it all along, and this is how they believe it should have been done all along. I think there's a market for wearable and personal sort of tech that's more personal than a smartphone, because it's on you all the time, like this Nike Fuel Band is.
David, Peter, do you have things on your wrists? Nope.
Clean.
No. Chat room, are you guys wearing watches or fuel bands or Wonder Woman bracelets? Anything of that?
I think there's a market for that sort of stuff. I don't know how big it is, because people stopped wearing watches because you wore a watch to tell time, and now your smartphone does that. I don't know whether they're going to go back to watches simply because your watch can do more. the good old calculator watch didn't catch on. Watches with slide rules didn't catch on. So it's possible, but I wouldn't really bet the farm on
Our
it.
chat room is saying Joshua Hogan, not a DC dog, always wears a watch. Chuck Henrich, nope. Bong Bong, currently wearing nothing. Nilesh Praj, watch. PK Cable, nope. Erwin Richard Devine only has a tattoo, but he wants push notifications to that tattoo. Kev46, watch. BRL 47, watch. Ben Rathing, I mentioned that poorly the last time, will be wearing a watch if he ever gets it back from the repair shop. I think that when we talk about the watch, though, I think, and I've said this before, an Apple wearable device will be to watches what the iPhone is to phones. And the word watch is a shorthand because people understand that you wear a watch. Just like the iPhone is really just a phone.app on a small portable computer, but it's really easy and everyone thinks they need a phone. So it's an incredibly convenient way to market it. And I could see Apple marketing an iWatch or whatever they call it, even if its only connection to an actual watch is watch.app or clock.app somewhere, buried in the file system.
Yeah, and I thought his comments, several of his comments surrounding that were interesting to me. One, what he said about, people actually wanting to wear something like, that it has to be fashionable. And so it's interesting that, they have one of the top industrial designers, ever on their team. And so, he's not a fashion designer. But I think if anybody can build something that enough people will want to wear, it's going to be Apple.
They can make fashion rather than be fashionable, right? Right,
exactly. And then, what he said about glasses, I thought was really funny because, for a while there and probably still, glasses are a fashion accessory. People will put them on with no prescription for the look of it. And most people,
that was Clark Kent, Dave.
Yeah, I wear glasses because I need them, but I wear these frames because I like them.
Right. And then, tons of people wear sunglasses. So it's not quite as, black and white as he painted it, which I thought was, he's got to knock some obvious arguments against the competitor, but I don't think they hold as much weight on thorough examination as they appear on face value.
Can Johnny Ive scale? Because since Tim Cook took over, Johnny Ive has been moved out of his traditional role as head of hardware design. He's now in charge of all human interface. We have him simultaneously working on the next generation of Mac Pros, MacBook Pros. We have him working on the next iPhone, the next iPad, the next iPad Mini. We have him working on iOS 7, maybe on OS 10. We have him building a watch. How much can this Johnny Ive do? And the interesting thing is that Cook pinned so much on him. He said that Apple's key, and this was almost like Steve Jobs' intersection of technology and liberal arts. He said that Apple's magic, the big M word, lies at the intersection of software, hardware, and services. And one of those tempels rests now exclusively on Johnny Ive's Atlas-like neck.
Yes, Apple's magic ingredient is aluminium.
Aluminium's not that strong, Peter. It just looks good.
Aluminium and glass. That'll go great on a wrist. But I honestly have been a bit worried about all this, Johnny Ive talk that, he obviously has great taste, and ultimately I think that's the most important thing. And so if his role shifts from, the day in, day out, honing every curve himself to being the taste maker at Apple for visual design, I think that can work really well. But, taking somebody who has made their career on hardware and putting them in charge of the visual design of software does concern me a little bit. Now, again, it's Ive, it's Apple. They have tons of great people below Ive.
And Richard says he's British, and that means a lot.
But it does concern me a bit that for all the skeuomorphic brouhaha, Forstall did make his bones building software interfaces, and so that was his bread and butter, his skill. And so it's going to be interesting to see if there's anything that slips in that looks pretty but sacrifices user experience, because I've has been focused on the hardware. And of course, I mean, there's I could talk about this for 30 minutes, and there's so much back and forth. I mean, the experience of the iPhone in your hand and the buttons, and there's it's not as if he's been sitting in this aluminum and glass tower only touching the hardware and not ever thinking about software or anything. But it's
a change,
a new thing for him to explore in a new way that he's never had to before. And so, it takes time to become great at specific skills, even if your general skill set lends itself. But what I think is if he is the tastemaker and he's got, the people who originally built iOS 1.0 under him, presenting the designs and kind of reining in some of the things, and he's, tastemaker, not necessarily pushing every pixel. Well, of course, he's not actually pushing pixels, but I think it can scale. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to remember is that Johnny Ive has been with Apple for longer than 20 years now, right? I mean, he was originally commissioned in like 92 and then taken on as a full-time employee. So he has been there for a very long time. And I'm sure that he has, without knowing anything about, the design department within Apple, I'm sure that he has trusted people around him who he delegates responsibilities to in terms of not just software design now, but hardware design as well. The funniest thing that I've seen related to this whole thing is the mock-up that somebody made of an iOS device running the new flat iOS 7 interface,
God.
flat black and white interface that makes it look like System 6.
That is the best thing ever.
I would jailbreak my phone just to install that.
I would
if that were a real thing.
I think actually I saw it when David retweeted it, which was fantastic.
Yeah, that was actually done
iOS
last year around this time, and it is actually a jailbreak theme. So you can jailbreak your phone and run that, Peter.
iOS 86.
That right there is my reason for jailbreaking. Absolutely.
There you go, dude.
Mark Gurman from 9 to 5 Mac wrote that it is a flat black and white interface. I've heard something similar, not exactly that. I've heard that it's flatter but not flat, and that it's silver more than white, and maybe charcoal more than black. But those are little, those can just be different ways that people are describing it. Is that at all appealing to you, Peter? I mean, I know the Maps app was kind of silver and black. The new podcast app is kind of a dark gray. iTunes has been sort of decolored. What's your take on that?
I couldn't care less, as long as it works. Honestly, I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm completely ambivalent about user interface. Obviously, it's very important, but at the end of the day, for me, it's all about the overall user experience. It's not about the actual look of it. If you've ever had your hands on an Android device or a BlackBerry device or a Windows Phone 8 device, that it's not really that hard to figure your way around it after you acclimate to the interface for a few minutes. So yeah, there are going to be some people who I'm sure are going to see the new interface and turn up their nose, just like there are people who turn up their nose whenever Apple does anything, whether it's well received or not well received. But the bottom line is, I don't care about the interface as much as what's running underneath it. And if Apple is providing me with improved functionality, if Apple is streamlining the way things work, if Apple is putting work into making applications run better and making the hardware get the most out of the software, those are the things that I'm happy with.
Bong Bong is saying the flatter the better, question mark. Richard Devine is saying Windows is too flat, not Windows flat. Derek, the design in DK Design and you, and your experience with WebOS, which was flatter and less contrasty, but not flat. Is there a happy medium?
I think there can be. I mean, I've got a Windows phone right here, and it's very flat, and I've gotten
it's steamroller flat.
It didn't take long at all to get used to this, and even though it's flat, it still has a dimensionality to it. Everything's flat, but when I go to, say, open an app, things happen in 3D within that.
It's like letterpress.
Right. So even though it has that flat interface, I think that there's a lot of playfulness that can be built into a flat interface. And it's that sort of playfulness, like the jiggle of the icons and things rebounding when you scroll, that made the iOS user experience as enjoyable as it is. It's not just straight utilitarian. There are things that make you go, huh. And that can be built into any interface. I think iOS could stand to be flattened out a bit. It's getting a little...
So Shakespearean.
I don't want to call it cartoonish, but it looks... dated in comparison to its competition.
Would that it were flatter. David, I'm gonna make a segue into talking about App Cubby, but I want to do it from the point of view of, so there's two thoughts here. One is that if Apple goes flat, that's going to be the trend for developers to sort of go flat too, because where Apple goes, so goes the developer nation. The other school of thought is that developers are going to deliberately go the opposite way and, maybe go even richer so that they contrast with Apple and get more attention. Have you thought about this at all? And where do you see, Trip Cubby, Gas Cubby, Launch Center Pro, all of your apps going in the near future?
I think about it a lot. I think way too much has been made of all of this. And at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of people out there who see a tastemaker praise flat and pan, skeuomorphism. And so, to them, then, taste is flat or close to flat or whatever. And so you kind of have this taste echo chamber where, it amplifies things that don't necessarily deserve amplification. So all that to say, I don't think that any and all, textures, any and all, real life metaphors are going to be thrown out the window immediately, or even necessarily a huge trend in that direction. I think there's already been a trend, and so in some ways, I'm hoping that Apple kind of meets somewhere in the middle between the what it's been and the absolute flat of Windows, and so some apps I think are going too far in the Windows direction, and so if Apple lands somewhere nicely in the middle where it's not completely flat and where there's maybe at times some subtle textures, maybe not, but hopefully it will bring us all to kind of a better place. However, I think there's going to be amazing, beautiful apps that are completely flat. Letterpress is one of those that, he did an amazing job at, building a flat app. And it's graphically, there are some shadows when you lift them up and stuff. So I'd almost call that more dimensionality in interaction than necessarily the text doesn't have drop shadows and things like that. So that's about as close to Windows Phone as you can get. And he did a really beautiful job with that. And then, on other ends of the spectrum, I mean, back in the day when Classics launched, and you got to play with that page turn effect for the first time. And now we can all say, oh, that's gaudy and that's, horrible and that's not digital native and everything. But you know what? It was delightful. It really was delightful when you picked up your phone and you could feel, slide your finger across a glass and see the little page turn. And so, those things will come and go. And sure, I would not build a realistic page turn animation into my app today, unless it was maybe a book reader, because I do actually really enjoy iBooks. But that doesn't mean that all of those sorts of things should be completely written off. And so I said this in a post on a Medium branch recently, talking about all this, is that I think that the trend towards minimalism often is mistakenly minimalistic, because when you just strip all that out, textures and shadows and all that, you can still end up with a really, really terrible app. And so there's this confusion of the right kind of minimalism that is, do the absolute best job you can building an app with the minimum, noise and annoyance to the user and things like that. But you don't get that just stripping away texture. And so I think there's going to be some delightfully skeuomorphic apps that, have really heavy textures and are just fun. But then on the other hand, we're going to get these like really, really flat apps that absolutely suck. And that's just, that's just life. So,
take a look at apps like DJ, for example, for skeuomorphism done right. That is a very cool app that makes use of the turntable interface that DJs are already accustomed to produce a really cool experience if you're interested in mixing music digitally. The concern that I've got about the whole flat app thing is, it sounds like Apple is chasing a trend, and that's not very Apple-like. I'm concerned that within a year or two, this fad is going to wear off, and then they're going to be right back where they started from. So whatever we get out of Johnny Ive and out of Apple with iOS 7, I'm sure is going to be very Apple more than anything else. Flat is probably going to be secondary.
Yeah, it's going to be Apple's take. Well, it's going to be it's probably the interface Johnny Ive would have liked to have had if he'd won more of those arguments with Steve Jobs back when, those arguments were being had.
Well, and the funny thing, and to Peter's point, I saw a mock-up of a weather app, and maybe it was included in the 9 to 5 post, but it was the really clean text on a blurred background and everything. And I thought that was really funny because the whole blurred background thing was like one of the hottest trends in 2012. Yeah. And I read a design post earlier this year that like, blurred backgrounds is so passé, that we're beyond that now. And
parallax is the new blurred, David.
That's so lame, having these blurred backgrounds. And so, to Peter's point, I would hope that Apple strives for something very lasting and not trendy, because it is probably going to be the foundation and the skin of iOS for the next 5 years. So I'm sure their goal is not a trend, but to do something truly beautiful and lasting and worth keeping around.
Here's my worry. My worry is that there's so many things that Apple has to fix and so many areas that I'd like to see them improve that, granted, the interface is important because the interface is what everyone sees when they use the app. To a lot of users, the interface is the app. And if it looks fresh to them, it'll feel fresh, even if the base functionality hasn't really changed. But there's so many things. I did a post this week about actionable notifications and about how I'm tired of chasing after data and I want that data to come to me. And I want to be able to, no matter what, almost like Byte SMS on Jailbreak or some of the stuff that's been in WebOS for a long time and is just coming into Android. But if a text message comes to me and I'm playing letterpress, I want to be able to answer it in notification and never stop playing letterpress. Or if alarm comes up while I'm still browsing the home screen, I want to quickly be able to reset that alarm and not have to go into clock.app and come back. And I'm just worried that so much time and so much resource is going into the reskin that things like iCloud and Notification Center and Siri might not get the deep focus that I think it needs.
Yeah, I think that the people that are going to be involved in doing the reskin, the designers and the coders that support them, aren't the same people who are building these sort of features.
I saw, and I don't know, he tweeted it publicly, but there was an Apple engineer who tweeted about how handy Kaleidoscope had been in managing hundreds or thousands of image files. And I took that to be a pretty big hint. One, that there is a very deep change in the user interface. But then two, that he's a guy, and I won't say his name or anything, but he's a guy who works has worked on a lot of very important APIs that developers see. And so when he tweeted that, it did make me think, here's a really talented guy who's worked on some of the more amazing APIs that we use day in, day out as developers. and he's spending a lot of time in Kaleidoscope managing huge piles of images. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I'm looking forward to the visual refresh as well. But, back to my point about Apple's HR problem, they just don't have enough live warm
no
bodies
bandwidth
to do
And we had that
everything at
happen.
once.
We had that happen back when the iPhone first launched. They had to push back an OS X release.
Yeah,
Because
exactly. And it
they
sounds
didn't
like
have
they're
enough
doing the
people to do
same
it.
this time, pushing back OS 10 for iOS.
And Peter did an excellent article about what we want to see in the next generation Mac Pro, and how theoretically Johnny Ive has to design that case, and or at least be involved in that, and a bunch of hardware engineers have to put that machine together if in fact there is going to be that next machine. But they're also working on the Mac Pros and the iOS devices. Peter,
And Johnny Ive is also working on the new OS 10.
Yeah, so Peter, what's your take from the OS 10 and Mac hardware point of view? How much is iOS sucking the air out of that room?
Well, don't forget Johnny Ive is building a giant robot too.
Robot Ive?
Yes, exactly. I'm not terribly worried about it. I think that I don't know. I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that if there is a Mac Pro redesign, it's not something that we're going to see at WWDC. That it'll be pushed out until further in the year. And I'm just taking literally or Tim Cook literally for what he said to a Pro user who was incensed about the very minor update that the Mac Pro got at the last WWDC, when he said, look for something for Pro users in late 2013 or later in 2013. I'm assuming later in 2013 means, sometime in Q3 or Q4. And that would jibe with Intel's roadmap for getting out faster Xeon processors. So that, all makes sense. I think that we're probably going to see something at WWDC in terms of redesigned or refreshed Mac hardware, but I don't think it's going to be any major redesign stuff. I think that we're going to see a lot of under the hood improvements in the form of Haswell chips, ending up in these machines, which is going to lead to improved graphics performance for the systems that rely on integrated graphics chips, which are almost all of them, except for the 15-inch model and the iMac.
But even the 15-inch model, that Intel one still drives our Retina display, which still drives me crazy.
Yeah, you and me both. And then improved power management as well. That's a big issue, and that's always a big issue for mobile users. So that would be great as well.
On the Mac side, I wonder too if we haven't kind of arrived at the most perfect incarnation of our current idea of a mobile truck computer, an actual laptop. So they can be working on things for further out in the future, but if you look even at the last 10 years of the Mac Pro, it has been pretty small, subtle changes to arrive at what is probably the ultimate incarnation of a computer that's going to sit on your lap with a full-size keyboard. So, it's possible that requires less focus now. And so, whereas he was designing the ultimate laptop simultaneously while developing the ultimate iPhone, while simultaneously developing the ultimate iPad, at this point, each of those devices has reached a certain level of incarnation,
a
that
platonic
they can
ideal,
be pushing toward other goals, whether it be new form factors, new devices, or new innovations. But I would imagine that the heavy work on those kind of things has slowed down compared to 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I'll move us along so we don't get bogged down in this too much, because there's so much to decompress, unpack inside this. I wanted to touch briefly on a segment we did. We're trying to do more of these on iMore, which is basically just talk about how we do things. And we kind of asked everybody how we write. And I'll share mine quickly and then just go around. And David wasn't prepared for this, so I'll give him the most time to think about it. But David is actually an excellent blogger when he's not, slumming it as an app developer.
Yes.
So my workflow basically is for the highest level stuff. If I'm driving in a car and I have a great idea, I grab Siri, I record a note because that syncs to all my computers, and I just make sure I don't lose the idea. And people in the chat room, if you have a writing workflow or favorite writing apps, yell out now so that we can include them near the end. If I'm at a real computer, if I'm at an iOS device, I'll use drafts just to get things down because they go everywhere. As soon as I get something in drafts, I can send it to a social network, or I can keep it as text, put it to the clipboard. It's sort of like a time shift DVR for my writing. If I'm at an iPhone or an iPad, I use Elements by Justin Williams because it's just a very quick, very light, very friendly markdown editor. I can put stuff in there. It syncs to Dropbox. I'm done. And then on the Mac, I use BBEdit because it's just BBEdit, and I don't use 1% of what BBEdit can do, but that 1% that I use is just incredibly handy. I can basically do anything I want with the text that I have. Peter, what's your preferred writing workflow now?
I sit down in front of a keyboard and I type words until something happens.
What do you type them into?
BBEdit. You know, I have tried to work on iPads, and I can't do it. It feels really unnatural to me, and I just can't work around it. I need a computer, and I need a real keyboard to write. And there's only one app that I use, and that is BBEdit. I have used it for so long, I can't remember using another text editor. It's fast. I've tuned it well for what I need it for, that's it. BBEdit or nothing.
BBEdit or bust. Mm-hmm. How about you, Derek?
Well, when it comes to getting down ideas on the road, it usually is either I will send myself an email because my workflow flows almost entirely through email. So I'll have that email unread waiting for me when I get home, and it's still staring me in the face when I'm working on other things. Or if it's something that is a longer term thing, I have a page in notes that I just write it down on, and it syncs over to my Mac and my iPad as I'm going. When it comes to the actual writing, I just use TextEdit.
Even for your books? I use Scrivener for books.
For the books, I actually use Word. I know.
Word?
I know. I use Microsoft Word.
Yeah, I found it interesting that in the entire document, none of us mentioned Google Docs, none of us mentioned Word, none of us mentioned Pages. We all prefer the plainer text stuff. I'll use InDesign if I'm actually doing layout because, no word processor is a substitute for a layout engine. But I use Google Docs because Derek and I have to, and Peter has to because Mobile Nations runs on the Google empire. But it's disappointed, confabulated, and confounded me so much this week. I actually wanted to stick a stake in its heart, cut its head off, and bury it in the sun.
That won't kill it. It'll come back.
David, how do you do your writing?
Man, I write so infrequently. I don't even have a real workflow. I mean, I don't keep track of ideas that I should write about, and there's so much I've been wanting to write about, but I do, try and get other work done since I do build apps and try and stay up on the industry and to have chats like this. But when I do write, I write in Byword, just nice full screen text editor, and there's nothing fancy about it. I actually wrote quite a while in Coda, just because my blog is all hand coded HTML. So
I thought you were going to say Xcode. I was surprised when you said Coda.
No, I don't spend that much time in Xcode anymore since I've never done any coding, and now with hockey and test flight and everything, I have to do my own builds. But there's a new app on iPhone as far as like just getting ideas down quickly, called Listacular, and I am shocked this app hasn't gotten more coverage because it's just fabulous. It uses Dropbox as a backend, and it does just plain text files, but it has its own little syntax where you can do lists, to-do items, or text. And so you get these little lines that kind of separates it out. So you can kind of use it as a to-do, but you can also kind of take notes. But then in the notes, you can be, doing some outlining and things like that. And it just hit the App Store 2 weeks ago or something.
Yeah, Bong just put that link in the chat room. Thank you.
Yeah, and I've really been enjoying it. It's just a great way to get text in quick. And because it's plain text files in Dropbox, then you can access them on your Mac and do whatever you want with them. And because the syntax is in plain text to determine what's a list item and what's a to-do item and what's a text item, you don't open your text file and have all this crazy stuff in there. It's just like, bullets and boxes and text. So it's a really, really cool app. So that's been integral in my workflow. And the developer is actually somebody I've kind of known on Twitter here and there, and he's going to be adding all sorts of URLs and X callback and stuff in the next update, hopefully. So
nice.
We should be really nice on that end too.
Our chat room, Jay Trammell says Evernote. I know Kevin and a lot of other people here love Evernote. DC Dog says Snippets, Notepad on iOS. Thomas Fraley says Siri Notes, Evernote Research, and Ulysses. And Ulysses is a response we got quite a bit. Bong Bong is echoing Scrivener, also TextEdit. I use Text Expander a bunch. I don't consider that a writing tool because I use it for everything, not just for writing. I actually embed the podcast by using TextEdit. But I think it's fascinating. We're going to do more of those. I think next we're going to do, is it photography, Derek? Oh, Derek's muted. I'll overdub that later.
I didn't want to talk to you anyway. Yeah, I think photography is what they're working on now, and that should be an interesting one.
All right. Okay, so that brings us to the end. Before we go, though, I want to give David a chance to talk about App Cubby's apps. And Launch Center Pro is the only app, and the first and only app that's ever actually displaced a dock app for me, David. Oh.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a really fun product to have. Ever since I started developing apps, it's always kind of a dream to be a first screen app. Something that somebody uses so often that they would put on their first screen. And with Launch Center, we kind of stumbled upon an app that a lot of people put in their dock. So it's exciting. And we're actually working on a pretty big 2.0 update to the app. Nice. So, we've kind of spilled the beans on Twitter and stuff, but there will be an iPad version, and there's some other
Launch Center
really
Pro
cool
Pro.
stuff.
Is that the name?
Yeah, Launch Center Pro HD Pro. So yeah, that should be coming out pretty soon after DubDub. So I'll I can talk about it more at WWC, and I'll show you hopefully what will be the release candidate or even already ready to release around DubDub.
Awesome.
Although I probably shouldn't even say that because it'll probably be like August before we finish it. Never give ship dates for software. I just made a classic blunder.
It'll be coming at some point in the near future. You have a lot of interesting things to announce later in the year.
Exactly.
Yeah,
don't. I have a lot of interesting things to announce this year, so I've got a lot of irons in the fire.
Don't clumsy ninja this.
Nice. All right, so David, where can we find out more about you and more about App Cubby?
appcubby.com, appcubby on Twitter, or you can follow me for the more kind of nerdy rants. I'm Dr. Barnard, not a doctor. My middle initial is R.
So you would have us believe.
So yes.
The parents are so proud he's a doctor on Twitter.
I am. I
play
did
one
stay
on
at
the
Internet.
Holiday Inn Express last night.
Derek, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at DKDSGN. I'm on app.net at just Kessler. And you can also find me all over the whole Mobile Nations network and all over that whole Talk Mobile thing, but you won't see me.
You won't see you, but you're there. And also, we recorded a Star Trek episode of Ad Hoc with Clayton Morris, Guy English, Derek Kessler, Brian Bishop from The Verge, myself, Georgia, and that should be up on Friday. So if you haven't checked out Ad Hoc yet, we did an episode last week with Guy and John Siracusa on the Xbox One. So we're getting a lot of good stuff in there. Make sure you check it out. Peter, how about you? Where can we find out more about you, your other endeavors, your other shows?
Well, imore.com, obviously. I'm Flarg on Twitter. That's Flargh. You can also read my occasional rantings and musings on loopinsight.com. And my podcast is angrymacbastards.com.
And I have a campaign going to make Peter say that in Scottish because Angry Mac Bastards is just so much more fulfilling. You can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find me on iMore.com. You can find all of our shows at mobilenations.com/shows. Like I said at the beginning, Mobile Nations has just had a big refresh. It literally cost Derek and I several years off our lives to help get going. And please check it out. Check out iMore. And thank you so much for... there's been some growing pains on this show. I'll just say it honestly. We got feedback last week, like, what happened to the show? There's a bunch of people and it's all different. And yet it's going to be a bit of a transition as we find our way into our new, better community show. So I do appreciate you sticking around. If you haven't already, please go to iTunes, leave a review, leave a rating. It helps, get attention to the show, and we get more great listeners like you. Thanks everyone in the chat room. Dennis Zadanov from Riedel, sorry, I keep saying that wrong, is there wanting to know who's coming to WWDC. I know David's there.
Definitely.
Peter's there. I'm there. Look for us there. And thank you everyone in the chat room. You are the best community in mobile today. And I do not say that lightly. I just can't end a show.
Say goodbye, Rene.
Goodbye, Rene.